Usually, history is written from the perspective of rulers, kings, or dictators. A depiction from the view of an everyday man is less common and sometimes does not correlate with standard history books. Some events look different at the level of the modest citizen. In the first half of the 19th century, thousands of immigrants from Europe came to settle in St. Louis. Marinus Rheinlander was among them. He followed a German tradition of noting important family happenings in their Bible. These notes are a vivid documentation of what the family experienced in St. Louis during the 19th century. Marinus Rheinlander came to St. Louis at a crucial time. The city was small, but growing rapidly, and was on its way to becoming the first metropolis west of the Mississippi. Although no one from his family became famous as a politician, war hero, inventor, or artist, they were part of the history of St. Louis, the gateway to the West.
I was born in Heiligenstadt in 1804, the very year the Corps of Discovery set off on their expedition. We are a family of cloth makers and merchants, are thriving well and export goods all over Europe. Napoleon was on the move, and armies from many lands marched through here. He occupied part of Eichsfeld but lost it in 1813 when he was beat in the Volksschlacht near Leipzig. 3 days of battle, many killed on both sides, many more injured. Hundreds of wounded soldiers came to our city to heal. A terrible sight. Many, many soldiers, once strong, brave, and from both sides, died weeks later, sometimes after long and painful suffering. 2 years later, Napoleon got his final blow at Waterloo. Shortly thereafter, Eichsfeld was plagued by terrible crop failures, famine, and nerve fever. The worst catastrophe, however, was in 1822, when mechanical looms were introduced. Almost everybody in Eichsfeld was part of the cloth industry. The numberless weavers quickly felt the pressure of the Industrial Revolution. The mechanical loom had replaced thousands of people and destroyed their livelihoods. I'm convinced that a human being can somehow survive war, famine, and disease, but how we can live without income or livelihood, I do not know. Life as we knew it turned to a nightmare. Both mother and father have passed, and I'm off to my own now. With my modest inheritance, I hope to start a new life. I, Michael Rheinlander, sail off to America looking for adventure and fortune. My nickname is Marinus, the man of the sea. Just embarked from my ship. I left from Bremen to America and landed in Baltimore on May 7th, 1841. From Baltimore to Cumberland, I took a coach and continued along the newly built National Road. This fine trail had many taverns and equally as many stories, so we never were thirsty, hungry, or out of entertainment. Reaching the fine town of Wheeling, we saw the wide Ohio River. Some of us travelers chose to continue on the road until Illinois, which unfortunately did not lead all the way to St. Louis. So I decided to take a steamship with great paddle wheels down the Ohio. Besides that, I was kind of tired of bumpy roads. Riding on this riverboat was the calmest thing I have experienced for a long time. It just seemed that the boat stood still and the beautiful banks of Ohio moved past by themselves. If you think the Ohio is wide, the Mississippi is definitely wider. This magnificent river brought me to St. Louis. The sight of the city and its riverfront were overwhelming. Maybe it was the long journey, perhaps the many, many steamships docked. I don't know, but I was just very glad to be here. Due to the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, it is muggy here, very muggy. Among humans as inhabitants, there are many insects here. Beautiful butterflies, bullet-sized beetles called June bugs, similar to our Maikäfer, wasps, and lots of mosquitoes just waiting to suck your blood. St. Louis was the first decent-sized city on the other side of the Mississippi. Virtually anybody going west would have to stop in St. Louis to get dry goods, supplies, or cloth. Steamships. The whole levee is full. Sometimes it's so full the steamships have to circle around until a docking spot is available. Over 2,000 arrivals a year means a lot of trade is being done here. So to me, a skilled merchant, this is the place to be. I opened a shop at 2nd and Almond Street, right in the heart of St. Louis. There are plenty of Germans here. There's even a German newspaper, Anzeiger des Westens, and a Catholic church. To my relief, there's a German-speaking priest here. Well, now having opened my shop, I decided it was time to look for a wife. And I found her. Her family is a member of our church congregation. They also came from Germany. She and I fell in love and became a pair. America is a nice place, especially if you're in love. Our first child, a boy named Oscar, was born. So now we have a Stammhalter. The name Rheinlander will persist in America. Isn't that strange? The fear of the Inquisition returned and backfired. There are a lot of Catholics here, including us, but there is surely enough room for the Protestants. Someone got into the medical school at the academy and saw some dissected human bodies and got mighty scared. Word got out the Jesuits had already tortured their first victims to death, as was assumed. A crowd of over 3,000 wild and aggressive people went right up to the academy and started rampaging. There were rumors that the Whig Party was behind this. Luckily, a group of armed Irish turned up and were able to push the crowd back. The winter this year was long and cold, even for Missouri. In May, the snow finally began melting, which we all felt as a blessing. Unfortunately, the snow was melting everywhere. Well, then it started raining. I don't mean dandy drops sprinkling, I mean buckets and buckets coming down for days and days. It was dark during the day, and at night it was light due to lightning. Thunder, big thunder, right over the house. The cabinets shook for fear, and the whiskey in my glass too. Everything was wet. No roof was made for that kind of rain. The streets turned into swamps, and the Mississippi just kept rising and rising. Houses from the north were washed away and floated almost intact with chickens on the roof right down the Mississippi. Livestock, cows, hogs, and mules swam down the river too. Those with their feet up were already dead. On June 27th, the Mississippi marked 41 feet. The riverfront was definitely underwater, and a good part of South St. Louis was certainly soaked. Then summer returned. The water is gone, but the mud stays, so we started cleaning up the place, shoveling and sweeping the mud away. No time to lose. If the mud dries, it gets very hard, like clay. Then only a hammer will get rid of it. We were all happy about the warmth, but unhappy about the insects. Because of moist foundations, cockroaches came out everywhere and ate up everything. The mosquitoes almost devoured us. The Mississippi froze over. This great, magnificent river has turned into a gigantic sheet of ice. It was so cold, so bitter cold, but people were skating on the Mississippi. Later, when the ice began to thaw, the ice surface broke into smaller slabs. The pressure of these slabs pushing their way towards New Orleans changed the tranquil surface to a turbulent mass, the slabs of ice crashing against each other with such brute force. Again, we see that Missouri is a wilderness, and that the might of nature is ever so strong. Now I'm a bona fide U.S. citizen. The St. Louis Court of Common Pleas has officially admitted me. No more kings telling me what to do. I agreed to the principles of the Constitution, which is fine with me. But I'm not really sure much has changed on my part. I breathe the same air as yesterday. I greet the neighbors just like usual. I still drink the same muddy water, and I still have an accent. Even if my mouth had no accent, I would still have an accent in my head. I really like being here. This is my place on this planet. So it's good that I have the American citizenship. Anyway, now I can vote. Times are changing. Gas lamps in the streets of St. Louis. Night becomes day. If you need something from a relative in another city or just want to tell your family in Germany about life here, you just sit down and write a letter, put it in an envelope and send it off. In this city, you can even stick a postal stamp on the envelope so that the receiver doesn't have to pay the postman. Now, a so-called electric telegraph connects St. Louis to eastern cities like Baltimore and New York. Sooner or later, we'll be connected to Europe, and letter writing will become obsolete. I have a water permit. For $5 a year, we can get water from the hydrant in the 6th Street. It still comes out pretty brown, but the mud settles down after a while. We took a ride on the omnibus. How exciting! We went to the ferry landing at Madison Street. It was very bumpy, and we were glad when we finally reached our destination. After months of building, our house was finally finished, and we moved in. Our store is running well, we have a lot of friends here, and our little family is growing. We want to offer boarding in our house. From our experience, we know how hard it is when you finally reach your destination but have no place to stay. And this place is busy. Many people, especially from our Heimatland, are on their way to make a fortune here. The firstborn in our house is our dog. We're very happy here. There was a tremendous fire which destroyed 3 blocks. Our house was damaged. The fire reached from Main Street to 2nd Street and destroyed over 400 houses. It began on a steamboat. The fire spread quickly and jumped the levee at Locust Street. The volunteer firefighters of the Missouri Valley Fire Brigade were losing the battle because the fire was between them and the river where they were getting water to fight the fire. Flames, sparks, and smoke were getting closer and closer to the cathedral and our home. Bolo, our dog, was barking like crazy. There were people trying to break into my shop. Bolo and I were able to keep them off. Later, I heard that 57 people were arrested for looting. After the fire, so many people had lost their homes and were forced into poverty. We were lucky. In our Heimat, there was a revolution. A constitution was written, a parliament was set up, and there were elections, almost as good as in America. But König Friedrich Wilhelm struck back. There were shootings and executions. The revolution was quickly pounded down. Does he really think democracy can be held back? It is only a matter of time that the common man will rule. The trouble about a city getting bigger and bigger is where does the human waste go? Straight into Choteu's pond. It used to be a nice place where we would picnic. Now it stinks. And as we know, the mosquitoes just love it when it stinks. Going over there nowadays means the mosquitoes get to have a picnic, and you're the eats. The mere thought of drinking water coming from that pond is sickening. Many people have died recently on cholera. So what do you do to avoid it? Can't stop drinking in the heat of St. Louis summer. Amelia Adelheid was born today. Our second born is a girl. She was baptized in our new St. Mary's Church. Today was Oscar's first day of school. He will get the best education in the whole world. The school at Fisher's Church is run with discipline and hard work. Oscar will be raised in the best Catholic tradition. Our newspaper, Anzeiger des Westens, reported a potato blight hit Europe, particularly Ireland, really hard. The crops were ruined. Spuds, the chief source of nourishment in Europe, is die Kartoffel, a worthy contribution from the New World against starving. Our little Adelheid died today as a result of whooping cough. This is what makes life so hard. An innocent child is harvested by death before it even has a chance to prove what talents it has. When birth and death are so near, it really hurts those loved ones remaining here on earth. How delightful! The city dedicated Lafayette's Park today. A lovely spot for a walk or a picnic. Again, St. Louis is ahead. It's surely the first park of this kind west of the Mississippi. Tamed nature. The shrubbery is tidy and trimmed. There are little bridges and pathways. The horse omnibus goes right to the park's entrance. Could be a nice place for festivities or brass music. Hot in the summer and cold in the winter. Today was extremely cold, -20 degrees. Even the snot off my nose froze before it hit the ground. This is indeed wilderness. Summers are blistering hot, winters bitter cold. Jungle and Arctic combined. The Bavarian Brewery started making beer here in St. Louis. No more importing or drinking basement-made beer. I don't know why they chose to make light beer. A good dark beer, like in my part of Germany, would have been a lot better. It certainly looks like the water from the Mississippi. So it would have pleased the St. Louisians, I think. Finally, they have drained Choteu's pond. At last the city is building a sewer system. Maybe then the waste could flow out of the city instead of into our cellar. It's election day. Thomas Hart Benton is my choice. He's really interested in the immigrant voters, and we could really use some support. Although our family is doing well, there are many immigrant families that are still very poor, living in bad housing and enduring terrible work conditions. On the other side, there are the nativists. They dislike immigrants. Although I had no trouble voting, we heard that poll judges were disqualifying Irish voters in the 5th Ward. There was a skirmish which led to big trouble. The nativist mob was street fighting the Irish and rampaging Irish shops and homes. 63 policemen tried to get the situation under control. Shots were fired. People were killed and wounded. Many Irish dwellings and businesses were damaged. Sometimes I don't like the Irish either, but there is no reason to kill people just because they want to vote. This city is getting more and more civilized. A new library has opened its doors and books. Now we have access to literature and knowledge. Amazing. Within only 4 years, the railway has expanded considerably. The tracks were just laid to Kirkwood, and now they go all the way to Jefferson City. But maybe progress has its price. On this gloomy day, 600 prominent citizens were to be part of the first trip to the state capitol and boarded 14 cars. A crowd cheered as the whistle blew, the mighty wheels began to turn, and the heavy breathing of the locomotive commenced. In the train, a band played and drinks were served. The passengers were very pleased at the feeling of moving so fast. Shortly after Hermann, Missouri, the train reached a great bridge crossing the Gasconade River. The wooden bridge was not sturdy enough and collapsed. The locomotive, the tender, and all but one wagon fell 36 feet down, crashing through the broken timbers or rolling down the embankment. St. Louis was shocked. I'm sure glad I wasn't invited to go. Now, I've been an American citizen for over 10 years, but if you're black, you can never become a citizen. This is the final decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. The whole thing started in the year I gained my citizenship. There are states in this country which allow slavery and some do not. A slave, his name is Dred Scott, was taken by his owner from a slave state to a free state, where they lived for a longer period of time. When they moved to St. Louis, Mr. Scott assumed he was still a free man. But to our disgrace, slavery is allowed here, so he was now a slave. He was owned again by another human being. However, Mr. Scott contested this. He said you can no longer be a slave if you lived in a state where slavery was abolished. He sued for his freedom. The first trial was in the courthouse of St. Louis, but ended up in the federal Supreme Court. Mr. Scott and his wife lost, but worse than that, the Supreme Court ruled that any person descended from black Africans, whether slave or free, is not a citizen of the United States according to the Constitution. I sure hope the Supreme Court doesn't suddenly rule that people from Germany are no longer citizens.
Our dear father Marinus Rheinlander passed away. May God give him everlasting peace. I, Oscar Rheinlander, age 14, am now continuing writing notes into the family Bible.
Marinus Rheinlander immigrated from Germany when Europe was experiencing turbulent times. He came to St. Louis with high hopes of success, of prosperity, and of finding a new home. But life here was rough as well. He and his family were part of establishing a community, developing values, and exerting democracy. His personal experiences, including the early death of some of his children, were certainly dismaying. Marinus Rheinlander did what he could to give his children the best start possible, to maintain European values, and to establish a new Heimat, a home.